A simple invention. Originally created in the 4th or 5th century CE on the Chinese plains, the stirrup made its way to Europe by way of the Pannonian Avars who had been pushed west from the steppes by the Turks. Although simple in nature, triangular in shape and mainly designed to support a rider's feet, this device not only impacted the people of its time, but also impacted historians who attempted to understand its true significance in medieval Europe. This tool, despite being seemingly insignificant, sparked an intellectual debate regarding its true place in medieval European history for much of the 20th century. Originally invented as a simple device only used to aid in the mounting and dismounting of horses, the stirrup has been a practical piece of equipment for quite some time. Stirrups, according to archaeological findings, have been around for centuries, with more modern representations forming in China under the Jin dynasty in the 3rd century CE. However, the precursor to the modern stirrup localized within central China and stayed there until the western migration of Pannonian Avars around the 7th century CE. This device proliferated throughout Eastern and Western Europe, possibly due to conflict and exchanges among various societies, and lay dormant for some time, finding limited use within the Frankish and various Germanic tribes at the time. Eventually, however, the stirrup found its way into the hands of Charles Martel, a Frankish military leader and statesman and one of the most prominent figures at the time. One of the earliest and most notable applications of stirrup-aided mounted combat in Western Europe, the 732 CE Battle of Poitiers under Martel's reign remains the turning point in what scholars such as Lin Townshend White Jr. claim to be the genesis of feudal society, and not only Carolingian France, but medieval Europe as a whole. A paramount conflict between two large forces on the River Loire, a large cavalry-based force of the Muslim Moorish army, and the tightly composed, infantry-based Frankish battalion. Frankish troops in phalanx-like formation decimated the lightly armored Muslim cavalry, and it was at this 8th century Battle of Poitiers, a previously underutilized piece of technology, the stirrup, found its way into the ranks of Martel's mounted force. According to Professor White in his work, Medieval Technology and Social Change, this successful military utilization of the stirrup prompted Martel to single-handedly innovate a new facet to European society in the form of a vassal-based land grant system to promote the development of specialized shock combat-based troops. In fact, White himself states, "Few inventions have been so simple as a stirrup, but few have had so catalytic an influence on history. The requirements of the new mode of warfare which it made possible found expression in a new form of Western European society, dominated by an aristocracy of warriors endowed with land so that they might fight in a new and highly specialized way. The man on horseback, as we have known him during the past millennium, was made possible by the stirrup." White, of course, references the knight's social construct which dominated much of medieval Western European feudal society. Contemporaries who supported White's thesis agreed that Charles Martel's seemingly sudden adoption of the stirrup and land grant systems acted as a precursor and influence to future European feudal societies, which closely resembled his interpretation of Frankish feudalism. In a sense, according to these historians, the simple stirrup influenced nations from the Franks to the societies of the High Middle Ages to recognize the superiority of armored and capable cavalry and accommodate social constructs in order to facilitate and encourage the growth of a cavalier class of mounted warriors. Before the stirrup, great dexterity and some level of skill was needed to stay atop a horse. However, the stirrup alleviated some of the skill needed to keep oneself on the saddle. Most importantly, at the hand of the stirrup, historians argue that the knight was able to flourish and become distinguished as nobility. The knight was seen as the tank of the Middle Ages and a glorified war machine, and according to the contemporaries of White's time, the stirrup, among other technologies, brought about the rise of feudalism and the knight in its wake, bringing the most recognized military figure of the medieval ages to fruition.
Lynn White argued in 1962 that the stirrup was so important because when it came to Europe, medieval warriors used the stirrup and then created feudalism. So he argues that this this new technology really created the whole structure, social structure and economic structure of the early Middle Ages. So he argued that it was enormously important. A lot of historians since him have argued that no, it's not really that important, and I have to agree with these later historians. There's not a lot of talk about the stirrup in records from the 8th and 9th centuries, which is the period that Lynn White said the stirrup was decisive. And in fact, the whole style of fighting that Lynn White associates with the stirrup, which is this mounted shock combat, which is the knight on horseback that you're familiar with, that actually didn't develop until about 400 years after the stirrup possibly first arrived in Europe. So I think the consensus now is that the stirrup might have been a factor in the way medieval people fought, but it certainly wasn't decisive, and it was not the cause of the development of feudalism.
Although White's and other historians' theories regarding the origin of Europe's prominent land tenure system, feudalism, seems valid after a cursory glance, historians and archaeologists have criticized White's claims in particular all throughout the 20th century. The forerunning critic of White's seemingly unsubstantiated claims was Professor Bernard Bachrach, who, with his publication of numerous articles and books, such as Armies and Politics in the Early Medieval West and Charles Martel, Mounted Shock Combat, the Stirrup, and Feudalism, questioned the validity of White's beliefs regarding the stirrup's role in feudalism and medieval Europe as a whole. Bachrach and others' criticisms regarding the topic sparked a period of time known as the Great Stirrup Controversy. Bachrach and historians at the time argued the notion that Charles Martel's decisive strategy during the Battle of Poitiers and subsequent battles revolved around the implementation of cavalry, citing the Battle of Avignon, where Martel abandoned a strong cavalry force in favor of rope ladders and battering rams. White's main point regarding the practicality of the stirrup rested on its place in facilitating the couched lance technique, where a rider would tuck in or couch their lance under their arm, ramming into enemies with the force of their body rather than with just their arms. He stated that without a stirrup, a rider would lack the support needed and launch backwards due to the force of the impact. On one hand, stirrups are present in the 11th century Bayeux tapestry. However, the tapestry clearly depicts Norman cavalry making use of centuries-old throwing and thrusting techniques with their lances, rather than the supposedly superior couched lance technique. This anachronous usage of technologies raised skepticism regarding White's claims and brought forth a wave of analysis regarding the validity of the professor's research. Additionally, Bachrach and other contemporaries argued against White's assertions that a mounted rider would be launched backwards due to the immense impact generated by a direct collision. In fact, these critics mainly referenced the lack of stirrups present within the 9th century Utrecht Psalter, a valuable Carolingian illumination, implying that even the Carolingian Franks, the descendants of Charles Martel, did not place an importance on the stirrup even in their artwork. Over the course of decades, White and others had their claims displaced and debased as a result of the historian community. It seems as though the true influence of the stirrup had been merely mistaken and based on assumption rather than on concrete evidence. Although, at first, perceived to be the main impetus for the evolution of feudalism and the knight social class, one can view the stirrup to be mainly useless in the span of medieval history. However, as a result of White's claims regarding the stirrup and the following historical analysis of medieval Europe, White was able to garner interest and practically create a whole field dedicated to the study of medieval technology and its effect within medieval European history. And although the stirrup may not have been as influential a piece of equipment as originally thought, it has influenced the historians of today to study the effect of such technologies more than a millennium later.